Hi everyone, this is Lara Hammock from the Marble Jar channel, and in today's video I will discuss how you can use Gretchen Ruben's Four Tendencies paradigm to find successful strategies to motivate your kids and maybe even yourself. So I recently read Gretchen Ruben's book, The Four Tendencies, the Indispensable Personality Profiles that reveal how to make your life better. So this is not a comprehensive personality system like Myers Briggs, Enneagram, or the Big Five. Rather, Rubin seeks to describe four kinds of people using one very limited filter: how we deal with expectations. The results are surprisingly illuminating and useful for things like motivation and behavior change. So I don't want to go into too much detail. Rubin has a ton of YouTube videos out there where she does deep dive explanations, and I would encourage you also to read her book. But in short, she categorizes people based on two measures: how they deal with external expectations like professional deadlines, commitments to friends and family, etc., and how they deal with internal expectations like New Year's resolutions, promises to yourself to make time for exercise or eating well, etc. She has a graphic for the four resulting types, but I prefer a straight up quadrant diagram. At the top is how you deal with external expectations, and vertically is how you deal with inner expectations. So just briefly, people who deal well with both expectations she calls upholders. They do the things that others expect of them, and they're also good about making time to meet their own expectations. They are usually self-motivated and reliable, but they can be uptight and rule-obsessed. Those who are good at meeting the expectations of others, but not so great at meeting their own, Rubin calls obligers. So these folks are the bedrock of society. Great coworkers, volunteers on the PTA, but highly susceptible to burnout since they take care of the needs and expectations of others, but frequently neglect their own needs in the process. Rubin talks about obliger rebellion, which is when obligers have suddenly just haven't had enough and refuse to meet any expectation at all. The vast majority of people identify as obligers. Questioners are those who meet their own inner expectations, but they question all external expectations. In fact, if you find yourself questioning this entire framework, you are probably a questioner. They are generally happy to comply with the expectations of others if, and only if, they have a good reason, and they will ask a ton of questions to determine whether or not it makes sense to them. Once they are convinced that something isn't just arbitrary or isn't a terrible idea, they then make it into an internal expectation, which they have no problems with. Questioners are self-directed, research and logic-oriented, and like to improve upon processes. However, the constant questioning can be annoying, and they really don't like to be questioned back. And finally, the folks who resist internal and external expectations, Rubin calls rebels. They will do what they want to do, when they want to do it, and the way that they deem best. They are authentic, they challenge the status quo, and they value freedom. However, they can be frustrating to others and to themselves, many times failing to meet basic expectations like paying bills, getting to work on time, and meeting deadlines. So I am guessing that just after that brief description of each tendency, you probably have a good sense of which category you belong to, and you can probably figure out the appropriate tendency for your spouse and for your children. So I am an upholder, leaning towards questioner. I am married to an obliger. And one of my kids is an obliger, and one is a rebel. So what I like most about this paradigm is its usefulness. Since it's based entirely around what makes us act, it lends itself well to tips for motivation and behavior change, which, if you are a parent, is something you might be interested in. So let's go back through each of the tendencies and talk about the best tips and strategies for motivating different kinds of people to act. So if you have a child who is an upholder, you probably don't need any tips at all for motivating him or her. I'm just going to stick with a female pronoun from now on for simplicity's sake. So upholders are amazingly self-motivated, and they tend to follow the rules. You simply have to tell them what needs to be done, and generally it will get done, since they tend to value performance and reliability. So one issue you may want to look for is a tendency toward upholder tightening, the inability to make an exception or even take a break. Encourage your upholder child to be open to new experiences and not to blindly follow the rules, but instead to look for the best and most effective ways to do things. If your child is an obliger, she may already feel a great deal of pressure from her teachers and her parents to perform well. Your job with such a kid is to ensure that she takes some time for herself and not just to watch Netflix and sit in her bed, but to exercise regularly and to do the things that she needs to do so that she does not get resentful. You can help her meet her inner expectations by helping her to set appropriate boundaries, and if she asks for it, providing some outer accountability for her inner expectations. She should not always prioritize the needs of others over her own needs. Questioners. So the next two tendencies require a little more finesse from a parenting perspective, since they don't readily meet external expectations, which are everywhere in the life of a kid. Doing what the coach tells you, turning assignments in on time, doing chores around the house, staying on top of schoolwork, even if it is just busy work. So those are all external expectations. Questioner kids are going to ask a lot of questions, which is going to be off-putting for some adult figures in their lives. They are going to try to figure out whether it makes any sense to them. Once they determine it does, it becomes an internal expectation, and they will happily comply. So, if you have a questioner kid, provide explanations for things rather than just commands. So not clean off the back deck, but we have guests coming over later and I would like to grill out, but it is messy back there now. Would you mind cleaning off the back deck? Or if another adult is failing to provide them with adequate justification, the dreaded because I told you so response, remind your child about the reasons that it is in her self-interest to comply. The coach is going to make you sit the bench. You'll get a bad grade on that paper. You will likely be marked tardy. These explanations may not necessarily justify the activity, but they may convince your child why complying would be the best option for her. Also, questioners tend to end up in analysis paralysis, so encourage your child to find an expert whom she trusts to help her short-circuit information and decision overload. And finally, rebels. Big sigh. If you have found your child to be almost impossible to motivate, you may be the parent of a rebel. I am, and I have found these tips to be really useful. So rebels resist both internal and external expectations, which means they can be contrary, independent, and highly attuned to anyone trying to stomp on their freedom. The expectations of teachers, coaches, or parents are generally not motivating to rebels. And generally, they're also not even able to meet their own expectations since they don't want to be controlled even by themselves. So Rubin gives 3 ways to motivate rebels. Number 1, information, consequences, and a choice. So telling a rebel what to do is not effective. You probably know this already. What is effective? Giving them information, telling them what the possible consequences will be, and then letting them make the choice. So this has to be done dispassionately. For example, when you leave the house at 7:50 a.m., you arrive at school late. You already have 7 unexcused tardies. If you get up to 10, you won't be able to graduate. You choose what time you leave the house. So don't nag, don't continually remind, just put it out there and let the natural consequences take effect. Reverse psychology. So this is also called paradoxical intervention. Basically, this means saying things like, well, I don't think you're going to be able to finish that by tomorrow anyway. And then they are motivated to show you that you are wrong. Use this one sparingly. And finally, identity. Rebels place a high value on authenticity and self-determination. Their identity is important to them, and that can be useful for motivation. If they see themselves as the kind of person who exercises regularly, they are more likely to work out several times a week. If they see a habit as part of who they are, they will not resist it. You can also tie good behavior to deeper values or who they don't want to be. Maybe they don't want to be the kind of person who has to rely on her parents to drive her to school. This will help her catch the bus on time. The common thread in each of these methods is that rebels need to feel like it is their idea, not yours. So there you go. A quick description of each tendencies and some tips on how you might motivate a child or yourself based on his or her tendency. I recommend the book or other videos that Gretchen Ruben has done on this topic for more information. And let me know what you think. Comments are always appreciated, and thanks for watching.